I'm like, yeah, but you cheated by preparing.
That's like saying studying is cheating.
Hello and welcome to the Hackaday Podcast. My name's Elliot Williams. I'm editor-in-chief of Hackaday.
And I'm Kristina Panos, assignments editor at Hackaday.
This is episode 183. This week we'll be talking stowaway science, cold basements, and warm beers. This week in the news, we've got a lot of deadlines coming up for you. This is the last week of the call for proposals for submitting a talk or workshop to SuperCon. And SuperCon's coming up in November, and we've extended the deadline for submissions until September 1st. Why? I have no idea. We always extend the call for proposals for a week. It's like tradition at this point. But we had no good reason to do that. But the good news is I've actually talked to a couple people who are like, oh man, I slept on the deadline. Will I still have time? And the answer is yes, you have time until September 1st to get your stuff in. But we're not extending it twice. So those you darn procrastinators, get your talks and or workshop proposals in. If your talk gets selected, you get in free. And if it doesn't, well, heck, if it's a serious entry, we will give you the early bird prize for your tickets. So you've got nothing to lose and loads to gain. And actually, next week, I'm going off on vacation. So there's not going to be a podcast next week. And this then is the next to the last week of round 4 of the Hackaday Prize, Climate Resistant Communities. So if you've got something you'd like to get in for that, you've got a little bit more than a week now. But I won't be kicking your butt next Friday to tell you to get your thing in. So, consider your butt kicked a week in advance.
Unless Elliot can send a postcard to your butt from...
Round 4 of the Hackaday Prize ends Sunday, September 4th. At 7 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. So get it in on Saturday. And then round 5 starts up, and this is the wild card round. Looking forward to that because, what's wilder than a wild card round?
Lightning round? No.
Ooh, that'd be good. We should have a lightning round where we electrocute people.
We should do that at SuperCon.
Yeah, I've seen that before. People occasionally bring high voltage implements to SuperCon, so there is kind of a lightning round.
I remember that. Attention, Midwestern keyboard enthusiasts. If you're anywhere near Kansas City, that's Kansas City, Missouri, the first Kansas City of 2 Kansas Cities, and you have time to roll into town by noon on Saturday, the 27th. That's tomorrow, if you're listening to this on Friday, like you should. Come to the River Market area for Kansas City's first ever of any kind keyboard meetup.
Of any kind. A bold claim.
That we know of. Now, it's only slated to go for 2 hours, but I think it's going to be the fastest 2 hours of my life. And I can also see it extending beyond the 2 hours at an off-site location at the ice cream place down the street, as I suggest in the write-up. I have been packing my bags for what I'm going to bring, and they're getting pretty heavy. And I've forgotten some stuff that I'm excited actually to have with me on display. I'm even bringing my little metal display holder rack things, so they don't have to just sit flat on the table.
What percentage of your crazy keyboard collection are you bringing with you?
Of the crazy collection, 90, I would say. Oh, that reminds me. You reminded me. I think I'm going to take my old tan ugly Kinesis and sticker bomb it.
Oh, nice.
Instead of painting it. We're going to see how that goes.
I bet you there'll be some people there who've never typed on one of those, and they'll be stoked to see it in real life.
Yeah, I'm going to bring the nicer looking one, I think. Maybe I'll bring both. Yeah, I'll probably bring both. And I want to bring something, some kind of laptop or something so people can actually type on things and see. Because if you can't see what you're typing, are you really typing?
No, you're faking it.
Yeah.
It's like the actors when they're doing hacking in the movies, right? It's like you're just flapping your fingers on the keyboard.
You might as well float your hand several inches above the kinesis advantage like they do in Men in Black.
There must be consequences. Actual letters must be typed somewhere.
I need to link to that GIF because that's funny.
Yeah, you should.
GIF. Are you a GIF man or a GIF man?
I alternate randomly and without any prejudice.
Wow, that's very forward of you. Not forward. What's progressive?
Inconsistent is the word you're looking
No,
for.
I think it's progressive.
Yeah. No, I see both sides. Anyway, I am excited. You're going to take lots of pictures for us?
I'm going to take lots of pictures. I wish I had a streaming backpack set up.
Oh, man.
Because that would be cool.
That's a good segue. In about 10 minutes, so save that.
Definitely pictures, maybe some, oh yeah, I was gonna cook up a couple of interview type questions for people.
Ooh.
Like, what's your daily driver? What's your dream board?
Mm-hmm.
And some other stuff, probably. Not too many things, but...
Hope you have a good time this weekend. That sounds like lots of fun.
Oh, thank you. I don't see how I could not have a good time.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
All right, it's time for What's That Sound? And this week, Kristina said she had a sound idea for us.
It's true. I was playing with my beep, and I was like, that's a cool sound.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I'm going to give it a listen. It's definitely like ratchety, springy. It's actually a super familiar sound. Damn it. That would be something's advancing, something with the you're moving a lever and some wheel is advancing. But why? Why does the wheel advance? Nah, I got nothing.
Hooray!
Hooray! Congratulations. First time ever. The shoe's on the other foot. Well, if you're out there listening and you can guess what this sound is, be sure to head on over to the links in the show notes over at hackaday.com/podcast. Fill out the form. Tell us what you'd like to be called on the air and what your guess is. And if it's right and if you've got luck, we'll be sending you a Hackaday Podcast t-shirt. All right, let's start up the hacks. I'd like to start off with a video knife throwing machine gets the spin just right. And this is a project by Quint. It's a fairly long video and it goes through the development of this fairly large, it may be a meter long and kind of 10 by 20 centimeters. It's a huge, two-hand carry box-like thing that then spins and throws throwing knives at a target. This is one of those things that sounds like it's going to be a maybe easy, maybe medium difficult project before you start. And then you start getting into all of the details and it just gets harder and harder. And some of them were, at least as Quint presents them to us, nearly insurmountable. But of course, it all works out in the end. So it's a really amusing video for that. But it's also fun just to look at this crazy machine, which basically uses two fast servo motors that have a long timing belt loop on them. And then in between these two timing belt loops, pressed up against the teeth, there's kind of a ring that has matching gear teeth for the timing belts. If you run both motors at the same speed, this little gear wheel thing is like brought along with them. But if you run one of them faster, the little gear wheel thing starts to turn. And that's kind of the secret here, because this is aiming to throw a throwing knife and they have to spin, when you hold it by the tip and you kind of give it a little twist like when you're throwing a frisbee or something, or a boomerang. It starts spinning as it's going and that keeps it flying straight and on target. The trick, of course, is to get the number of spins just right so that it lands point in, and that depends on the distance away. And the idea here, anyway, was you could use LiDAR and you could calculate this easily with a computer and spin it up just right. And that part actually turns out to be the easy part, kind of tacked on at the end, that may have even motivated the whole project. But this kind of elaborate mechanism where you have a spinning wheel between these two timing belts, and then it also has to be powered because it has to hold on to the knife and then let go. And he tries to do that with an electromagnet. So the spinning wheel has brushes that then have to contact these like tracks along the way to provide the spinning wheel thing with power for the electromagnet. And then of course electromagnets don't, like in your brain, you think about an electromagnet holding a knife on there and you're like, yeah, totally. And then I'm going to start spinning it and it's going to spin the knife. But pretty much no matter how strong that electromagnet is, you can have it really hold the knife on tight. But if you think about it spinning, the only thing keeping that knife spinning with it is friction. And so you can have like the world's strongest electromagnet, but if it's like well greased in between, you know, the magnet's going to spin and the knife's not going to spin along with it. So he ends up having to kind of engrave teeth into the knife and into the magnet. And there's just all sorts of crazy details here that are the kind of things that, you know, you kind of gloss over on, or at least I do when I'm starting a project like this. You kind of gloss them over in the beginning and you know, jump boldly into the project. And then it's like, oh, dude, details everywhere. But it's really fun to watch them get solved here.
It's a much harder problem to solve than making, say, a playing card shooter.
Yeah, right? Although it is totally similar.
That's what I thought of at first, and then you made me remember that, oh yeah, they spin too. That's no joke of a problem and a challenge right there.
Have you ever seen the paper airplane gun?
Yes.
Because I actually got the chance to see this thing in actual life.
No.
The guy who makes this paper airplane gun is German. He lives around here somewhere in southern Germany, and he brought it to Make Munich once and was shooting the darn thing. And I'm like, wow, I saw this on Hackaday. And here I am seeing it in real life, completely unrelated to Hackaday. Anyway, I'll definitely throw that link in the show notes because a machine that folds paper airplanes for you and then shoots them out the front is a marvelous thing. But it's another one of these things where you have like two kind of gear wheels that like push things along like a card shooter.
Like a card shooter.
I probably need a card shooter.
Everybody needs a card shooter. Boy, I sure wish I had a streaming backpack.
I've heard someone else saying that recently.
And it has occurred to me upon choosing this first hack that I could probably build one myself for much less than the price of commercial streaming backpacks. For my first hack, I chose Live Streaming Backpack Takes Streaming on the Go. Now, Melissa isn't a streamer, much of a streamer, but decided to build a streaming backpack for the technical challenge. And if you're not familiar with the whole streaming scene, a streaming backpack is essentially a setup you can take on the go to record audio and video and send it out through for example, your Twitch channel. So this one has a Raspberry Pi 4, which is not fast enough for encoding, but fortunately the GoPro that Melissa chose, the Hero 10, does its own encoding, and it has a USB interface, which makes it easy to use. So you can buy commercial streaming backpacks, and they start at like $2,300.
Yikes.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's crazy. So because the Pi is in a dark enclosed backpack, Melissa put a massive heatsink on it, and I suppose I forgot to mention the business part of the backpack is a 4G modem, which sends the goods back to your PC so you can stream it. I really like the backpack mount that Melissa designed. It goes straight onto the strap and has those fins that go, that strange fin GoPro mount. But in the future, that's one of the things they want to do is redesign it so it can move on 2 axes instead of just one. And they want to figure out better cooling in the backpack. I would think maybe you could just throw a couple ice packs that don't condensate in there.
Right.
Or even if they do, put them in a Ziploc or something would help. And also to use an external microphone, which I found surprising that Melissa didn't use an external microphone, because my experience with GoPro cameras is I don't even know if ours has one. We have an old one. Or if it does, it's terrible, the microphone on it.
I have 2 old GoPros that are so old, they're just GoPro Heroes. They're before they had a second one, and so they're just called Heroes. They don't call it anything else.
OG Hero.
OG Hero. And those things, I swear they pick up more wind noise than they pick up whatever it is you're trying to get on record. They're pretty tough. The video still is, they don't do 4K because they're a million years old. But what video does come out of them is actually really good quality. They've always been pretty cool in terms of, I'm lens prejudiced, but They actually have a good lens on them. And then you couple that with some good sensors and boom, you've got good video. Problem solved. All right, for my next hack, I picked 2022 Cyberdeck contest entry Extruded Rig Exudes Coolness. This is a Cyberdeck made by Faceless Loser and not his real name. And it's a fantastic kind of bare bones take on the Cyberdeck. It's made up of 2020 aluminum frames and some 3D printed brackets that hold it all together. The parts all slide into slots, slide into those like track slots in the 2020 aluminum extrusion and are custom 3D printed. So it fits the screen and it fits a hold down for the Raspberry Pi 400 kind of all in one keyboard computer, and also like a speaker and an amplifier and some battery stuff and everything. Basically, everything is mounted onto the slots in the 2020. Faceless Loser describes it as being kind of like Eurorack for a Cyberdeck, and I thought that was exactly right. It's kind of fun because if you have the wrong things in it, you can just swap them out, right? I guess you unscrew one of these side plates and then you can just slide whatever components in or out you want. But I don't think that's happened a lot here because this design looks actually pretty stable. Faceless Loser is using it as a desktop computer, basically. It's for looking up schematics and for playing music sitting at the desk. It's like perched above a soldering station, but it could become a portable rig too. I really like the modularity of it because I can totally imagine thinking, today I need this or tomorrow I need that. But at the same time, it's also gotten the cable routing kind of smooth enough that it actually looks like it's one thing instead of being kind of a mismatch of parts. It's got kind of a honeycomb 3D printed back printed so that it's harder to smash the screen from behind. All in all, it's just a really cute idea, I think, for a Cyberdeck. And I don't know if you would want to download the 3D print files and copy them yourself because you probably want different things slapped into yours. But basically just this idea of kind of a frame, a do-it-yourself Cyberdeck / small luggable computer kit where you could just slide your own parts in is really charming. And I just like this one a lot.
I do too, and it's got to be so satisfying to actually do the slotting into the extrusion.
Yeah, right?
It would be fun to have an element that you could just move back and forth when you were as a fidget item, move it back and forth on the rails. For my next hack, I chose ESP8266 Smart Vents keep tabs on home temps. This one's by Tony Brobston. The idea here is to keep the house more uniformly warm or cool by electromechanically moving the vents. So what Tony did was replace all the vent covers, vent plates, vent apparatuses.
Yeah, right?
What did Tom call it?
Vent register. What does that mean?
I don't know. Let's use it.
Yeah, let's go.
So what Tony did was 3D print a vent and the box that holds it, let's call it a register for fun, which lets you control the louvers on a standard metal vent. So each of these new vents has its own ESP8266 and a servo to dial in the louver position, and it's all controlled with MQTT. Now, if you watch this demonstration, and you should because it's very short, very satisfying the way the louvers open and shut. It's almost a little jarring the first time. The awesome part is that this is an open source project, and Tony's already designed a bunch of different vent sizes. So I don't know about you, but I have kind of tall, narrow vents, and then I also have 2x10s or whatever. Yeah. And then some really old stepped ones that they didn't replace. But I wonder if this kind of thing would work for a split level like my house or your house.
Well, if you're looking for something to drive your automated louver vents, my next hack from Vadim Kachenko, is this the oldest open source HVAC project in existence? ? The answer here may actually be yes. This is a fantastic old project dating back to at least 2007. And it describes kind of exactly like what you were talking about, Kristina, a multi-zone home climate control project. And this one had its genesis in the fact that he moved into a house where the basement was always cold and the attic was always way too hot, and had exactly kind of your problem of how to get the heat evened out across the house. And the answer was zones, and figuring out how to control the heating and or cooling to different parts of the house on zones. And this led to him making kind of a DIY zone house control system that has evolved over the past 15 years into something that is very slick and entirely open source and very accessible. Now, his code looks like it's more on the control side of things, but it seems to interface with a whole bunch of hardware. So I'm actually pretty sure you'd be able to work these ESP louvers you were just talking about into this system. He started this so long ago that back then, I guess, XB modules were kind of the new hotness. But in his more recent entries, he does say that these days he would be doing the same sort of thing with an ESP32 or 8266 or something, just from a price performance standpoint. He's got code in there, though, that works with all of them. It works with one-wire devices. It works with basically anything you can hook up to an ESP32. Previously, this project actually predates MQTT, but it has MQTT patched onto it now. Kind of the centerpiece is a controller and dashboard and kind of everything overview that runs on your cell phone. This is his Android application, HCC Remote. And he said he'd originally planned to run this on a computer or as a freestanding thing, but just found it was so pleasant to do it just on the cell phone that he actually hasn't gone much beyond the Android app there because it's the nice and easy way to do it. It also integrates into everything else out there these days because it's open source and because that's what you do. Plays well with ESP Home and with Home Assistant, and through its various kind of protocol extensions, it'll work with basically anything that speaks MQTT. So it looks like it's a great way, for instance, if you're like me and my system doesn't have anything reasonable as a front end. It's actually just a whole bunch of horrible Python scripts. If I could work things in this sort of an easy to integrate home controller Android app would be totally useful for me.
For my next hack, I chose Deep Deck, going beyond the macropad. Now, this is Nick Velasquez's interpretation of the macropad, but it's so much more than just a macro spitter. It actually utilizes the wireless capabilities and the Bluetooth on the ESP32. And you can connect to APIs to do stuff like get the weather or your YouTube sub count or Twitch notifications on little OLED if that's your thing. I particularly like that there are 2 rotary encoders. Makes me think that you could put a little Etch-a-Sketch Easter egg in there if you wanted to. That'd be fun.
For my first quick hack, I'd like to feature John Calhoun's An ASCII Terminal Like It's 1974. This is a really sweet little quick build. It basically is an old school ASCII terminal. It breaks out 7 parallel wires and strobe. So it's not even serial ASCII, it's real parallel ASCII. It also implements a bell. It does it all on a cute little OLED screen in a nicely folded little acrylic case. Looks really sweet, and it might be just the thing to have on your desk if you're building like a homebrew breadboard style, Ben Eater style retro computer of your own, and then you just need a terminal for it. This would be just the ticket. Next up, Hackaday alum Cameron Coward. Make multi-material resin prints with a syringe and a bit of patience. This is just a really cute idea. In the example, he's printing a wheel, and so he's printing the tire part out of a flexible filament, and he's got little holes left in it where he then injects a harder resin and UV cures it. The idea is that you can leave negative space for bits that you would like to become hard later, or vice versa, soft later, and make these kind of multi-material prints yourself, a little bit of post-processing. And last up, Kevin Santo Capucho. Why didn't we think of making a remote trigger button? This is a fantastic addition to an oscilloscope. You know how you've got that single trigger button, and if you're doing something where you want to do a manual trigger to capture a particular event, you have to like reach up there all the way over there to the oscilloscope button. This is a simple hack to hook an external trigger button up inside to exactly that button and be able to press it on your desk so that you don't have to look away from whatever it is you're manipulating. You just hit that button and your scope takes the shot for you. Simple, cute, and a neat bit of functionality that I've never actually seen in a professional scope.
I was going to say a foot switch would be cool, but that looks sturdy enough to be a foot switch almost.
Actually, now that I think about it, mine has an external trigger. I wonder if you could just short that. Like, it's got a BNC connector on the back for external trigger. You wouldn't even have to hack anything.
My first quick hack this week is M. Malik's keycap shine. No, shiny keycaps. M. Malik used acetone vapors to make a set of keycaps be uniformly shiny, like they're made out of Bakelite or something. Now, the idea here is to just use the vapors of acetone to shine up the keycaps, because actually making contact would dissolve the keycaps, and that's bad. The way that M. Malik did this was to put a little bit of acetone in the bottom of what was hopefully a sacrificial glass cake pan, and then friction fit a slightly wider little cardboard platform to float above the acetone and hold the keycaps. And then continuing in the kitchen theme, put a glass cutting board on top to keep the vapors concentrated. And all it takes is just a few minutes, and you got these nice uniformly shiny keycaps. Next up is Ivan Farafantov's Z80 single board computer. Looks like it could have been a killer product. Boy, is that the truth. Now, Dan Maloney called this the Z80 that never was, and it's a lovely mix of modern and vintage styling and profiling. And most of the chips inside are true to the Z80 era, except for the video part, and that's where Ivan used an Atmel CPLD along with a dual-port RAM, and outputs it to a VGA monitor. Even so, the display isn't out of control. It's still a 16-color palette at 256 by 192 pixels. And it just looks, I think it looks amazing. I'm tempted to call it a headless cyberdeck. Can we call it a headless cyberdeck? Will someone object? Yes.
Both of those are true.
Someone will object.
Yeah, and yes, you can call it that.
So that makes me wonder, what is the smallest VGA display you could get today? Oh, as a special bonus, it has 2 DB9 ports for your Atari joysticks. If you watch the video, you can see Ivan play his Scratch implementation of Boulder Dash. And I don't think I ever played Boulder Dash, but that looks like it'd be really fun to implement in like CircuitPython or something.
But it also looks like a fun game. I don't think I've ever played it.
Looks more fun than Dig Dug. I'm just bad at Dig Dug. And finally, I chose Toddbot's Pico Step Seek is small but perfectly formed. This is a step sequencer, a very compact step sequencer built on the Raspberry Pi Pico. To give you an idea of how small it is, everything is mounted on the PCB, and of course the Pico is up there in the upper left corner. When you look at this article, if you scroll down to the tweet, you can see the render, which shows the guts of it. And it looks like a fun, easy build. Everything is through-hole except for the jacks, but those look very, very solderable by hand, I think. I absolutely love those LED embedded buttons. The fact that they're stepped also is just perfect. I think we should bring back stepped keycaps more than just caps lock. Definitely watch the video because it sounds lovely. I think it sounds like a marimba, which of course you can make it sound like anything you want, but
sounds like MIDI.
Right now it sounds like a marimba to me.
All right, that brings us to our Can't Miss articles. These are long-form pieces written by our lovely Hackaday staff. And this week I'd like to pick Tom Nardi's Unpacking the Stowaway Science Aboard Artemis I. If you're not at all into space stuff, you might not know that in the next week or so, NASA is getting ready to take the first steps toward sending people to the moon again. And this is Artemis I. This one is unmanned, but it's basically testing out all the logistics of getting something into translunar orbit and back to Earth again. First test run of a new vehicle is a dangerous time, but on the other hand, it's going to the moon. So it offers a tremendous opportunity to get a little science done if you don't mind taking the risk that the whole thing may completely fail because it's a maiden voyage. And that's the interesting trade-off that Tom kind of describes in his write-up here. And so 10 CubeSats are getting the free ride. They're getting the opportunity to fly along with the Orion rocket to the moon. Because this is a risky mission, they're just using CubeSats and not anything more expensive. But because it's a risky mission, they get to do it for free, which enables some really interesting kind of high risk but potentially high reward research. And so if you've got a CubeSat sized, well, I mean, it's too late for you to get on board now, but if you had a CubeSat sized science project, you could have applied for a position on board. Tom mentions a couple of the missions in depth, which are pretty cool. One is one from the Japanese Aerospace Agency, JAXA. It's called Omotenashi. It's going to basically crash into the moon, but deploy a balloon for a soft landing at the last minute. Another one from the Italian Space Agency, Argo Moon, is a small CubeSat that is intended to be extremely maneuverable and has a camera on board. So it's going to try to track the big ring, the ICPS, which these are all packed into after it gets ejected, and try to, maneuver and track it along the way. And last up is NEA Scout, which is going to loop around the moon, get a gravity assist, and then unfurl a solar sail and head on out to a near-Earth asteroid, hence NEA Scout. And that's a really cool one too. It's testing out solar sail technology. There's a bunch more projects in there, and actually Don Smith from Team Miles writes in about his CubeSat, which is on board. Tom apparently read somewhere, and we've seen it a couple other places too, that because these are super experimental, they're riding in the cheap seats, they haven't been able to recharge the batteries for a long time there because they've been in kind of a lockdown state. They can't be allowed to jeopardize anything else going on with the project. They're like minimum priority, which sounds a little bit mean, but on the other hand, free ride to the moon. But Don Smith of Team Miles comes in and says, actually, NASA did let them in June, not October 2021, as we reported, but June of this year to recharge the batteries and make sure everything's still working. But since then, they've been sealed up and ready to go. This sounds like difficult, and I guess some people have been critical of it, but my understanding of CubeSats is that's always the way it is. You kind of have this integration phase, and beyond that, it's hands off. It's good luck. It's queued up and ready to go. You can't touch it. You can't do anything else with it after that. And so this seems like a similar thing, I think, except that because these are kind of the low CubeSats on the totem pole, it has been a while since they've been able to see them, communicate with them, check the batteries, check the tire pressure. But when they go up there, they'll be able to talk to them and everything should be cool. Of course, you have to be rooting for the rocket to go around the moon and come back home. But think about all the cute little CubeSats up there doing cool science, and I think that's really cool too. So I'm with Tom. I'm rooting for the little guys here.
Well, yeah. For my can't miss article, I chose Jenny List's "Why Do Brits Drink Warm Beer?" ? Why do Brits drink warm beer? Well, the long and short of it is that the answer is in the yeast that's used, which determines the type of beer in the first place. Now, I find this interesting because I'm not at all a beer drinker, but I will drink cider. No comment on that? Okay.
No, I'll drink cider too.
But will you drink beer?
I will also drink beer.
I do not.
Oh my
The only
God.
one that comes close, and it's just because I expect it to be beer, is Guinness. So that's part of my story at the end, is that the only time I've had warm beer, it was Guinness in a coffee house that served beer and wine for a while. So why do Brits drink warm beer? As we all know, or maybe not, the basic beer recipe is that you take some malt, you take some hops, you add some water, you add yeast, and you let it all ferment for a while. Now, as far as I know, malt is malt, hops is hops, water is water, but the yeast varies tremendously. The delineation seems to be ale versus lager, and the ale yeasts ferment quickly and at a high temperature, and they float at the top. And the lager yeasts are completely different. They ferment slowly, and they sink to the bottom. Jenny concludes that lager tastes lighter than ale in general, and that's why lager is good cold, but ale tends to lose its flavor when chilled. She also mentions that you don't have to add yeast because there is yeast all around us. So if you just use the ambient yeasts in the air, you have a lambic beer, or something like a Belgian lambic beer.
Some of which, and I like Belgian beer more than most people do, some of which really taste like stinky socks.
Huh.
So be careful what you wish for when you have randomly fermented beers.
Well, I like a single malt scotch, so I would try a lambic beer.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you have to.
Do we
you
have
should.
any here? Are there any I've heard of? I'm looking at Wikipedia.
It could be a mix. They're always really sour, and that's because I think a lot of what's floating around in the atmosphere is lactobacillus, the one that makes milk curdle. And so, they've all got a little bit of a just the sourness from the yogurt, not the rest of it.
We should beer up some lambic beer in the design lab.
I think part of the thing with Belgian wild fermented beers is that there are enough beer producers that some of the stuff floating through the air probably just is beer yeast. And you just get lucky because you're in a good neighborhood. If you ferment whatever is growing up in the design lab, I have no idea what you'll get. Yeah, I don't know if I believe this. I mean, it's definitely true that Brits drink a lot of ales, and Brits drink their ales not warm, but kind of cellar temperature, warmer than it comes out of your fridge anyway. And it is true that Germans and Czechs and, drink these kind of lagery, Pilsner lager type beers, and they drink them cold. I mean, there is kind of that thing where ales are kind of, I don't know what, mouthier. They're kind of breadier. They're kind of, there's kind of more beer there. And lagers are kind of more refreshing. And the hopsy note kind of comes through a little bit more.
It's like treble versus bass.
Yeah, exactly. And somehow, I mean, Jenny's not wrong. It is nice to have, kind of a lager cold and an ale at room temperature. So that part is actually totally true, I think. But I can't tell you why.
It makes me think of tea versus coffee. I'll drink
Right?
black hot coffee all day, but if you put it in the fridge for a while, I'm not touching it.
Okay.
But I love tea either way. Iced tea, hot tea, but it has to be black, no sugar, no milk.
Yep.
And it is lighter than coffee. It's way less acidic.
That may be it. It may be more of a refreshing versus this is a meal sort of thing.
Yeah. I wonder how it affects cider. I should try to make my own cider.
You absolutely should make your own cider. I've used champagne yeast for cider because it's able to ferment to a really strong alcoholic. Alcohol is poison to yeast in the end, and so it's a self-limiting system, but champagne yeast is able to ferment to a pretty high alcohol volume. So if you want to get a really dry cider, that's definitely what you want. Actually, Jenny is our resident.
That's true.
Jenny is our resident cider master, so you should definitely ask her for tips and not me. Cider's kind of an agricultural product, right? And if you've got good apples, you'll probably get good cider out of it in the end. Where, it's a lot like wine in that sense, right? If you've got good grapes, boom, you're going to get good wine unless you screw up. And same thing with cider, I think. Beer's kind of like the engineered beverage. Beer's like uniform ingredients in on the front end, so you can kind of engineer it, for lack of a better word. Wine and cider is just get yummy fruit, ferment, drink.
Put lampshade on head.
That about wraps it up for this week's Hackaday Podcast. Thanks very much for listening. You will find all of the links to everything we mentioned and more in the show notes over at hackaday.com/podcast. And if you see anything cool or do anything cool, let us know by sending us an email, tips@hackaday.com. And because we're on vacation next week until the week after next,
Keep on hacking. You all ready for this? You know those dials, those
yeah.
Oh.
Interesting. Damn it. Someone out there is screaming.
Someone out there's always screaming. The Simpsons lied to me.
C'est la vie.
Levy, why are you sleeping in here? Well, it's a Westinghouse.